The hearing room was full. Every seat was taken. The cameras were live, and millions of people were watching from home. Reporters tapped away on keyboards. Some whispered into phones. It was the kind of day when anything could happen. In the center sat Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, known to the world as AOC. She looked calm and confident, her notes resting neatly in front of her. Across from her sat Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana. Wearing his usual calm expression, glasses low on his nose, hands folded, AOC leaned slightly forward into her microphone. Her voice was smooth, almost polite, but carried an edge. "Senator Kennedy," she began, "you speak often about the economy. But with respect, can we really trust economic theories from someone with your educational background?" For a moment there was silence. Then a quiet laugh rippled through the back of the room. Someone coughed, trying to hide their grin. The message was clear. AOC didn't need to say the names of Ivy League schools. She didn't need to mention her own economics degree. The implication was sharp. Kennedy didn't belong in this discussion. Senator Kennedy looked up slowly. He didn't flinch. He didn't smile. He adjusted his glasses and took a breath. The cameras zoomed in. "Well, Congresswoman," he said, his southern drawl calm and even. "I may not have gone to Harvard like some people in this room." He paused. The room held its breath. "But I did graduate from Vanderbilt University. I studied law at the University of Virginia, and later I earned a degree from Oxford." The quiet gasp that followed spread across the hearing room like a breeze. Some reporters raised eyebrows. Others started typing faster. Kennedy didn't stop there. "I don't usually keep score," he continued, looking directly at AOC now. "But since you brought it up..." A few people in the audience exchanged glances. The energy in the room shifted. Suddenly, the image of Kennedy as the simple, folksy senator began to change. He leaned in a little, his tone steady. "I was raised in a small town where our library was inside a trailer. The nearest bookstore was 2 hours away. My mama cleaned houses. My daddy sold tires 6 days a week. And I worked nights and weekends. To pay for school, not because I was building a resume, but because I had to make rent." The silence deepened. Even AOC seemed caught off guard, her eyebrows slightly raised. Kennedy continued, slower now, voice filled with quiet strength. "So if you think my voice doesn't belong in this chamber, I'd ask you to step outside this bubble for just a moment." A camera light flickered as a photographer captured the scene. Reporters were already forming headlines in their minds. It was no longer just a hearing. It had become something else, something deeper. The room, the viewers at home, even the lawmakers in their seats could feel it. Kennedy leaned back in his chair. He didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He simply folded his hands again, as if to say, "I'm done." AOC cleared her throat. She looked down at her notes, but didn't speak right away. The moment had shifted. What had started as a subtle jab had turned into something far more powerful. For the first time in that room, Senator Kennedy's story had landed in full view of the public, not just his credentials, but the story behind them. His rise from a small-town boy to an Oxford graduate, his family's hard work, his refusal to apologize for where he came from. It wasn't just a comeback kit, it was a statement. The room didn't erupt, it simply froze. Because in a place often filled with noise, silence speaks the loudest. And in that moment, it said everything. The silence after Senator Kennedy's words lingered like smoke after a gunshot. It wasn't awkward, it was reverent. The type of silence that only comes when something true, raw, and unpolished hits too close to home. Even the cameras, which usually shifted from speaker to speaker, stayed fixed on him a moment longer, unsure whether to cut or hold. Congresswoman AOC straightened her back, her fingers tightening slightly on the edge of her notes. She hadn't Expected that answer, not the credentials, not the humble beginning, and definitely not the moral weight behind it. But this wasn't over, not in Washington. AOC looked up again. Her voice was steady, but not without calculation. "Senator," she said, "no one questions the struggle. Many in this room share it. But if you believe hardship is a substitute for economic literacy, I'd caution against equating life experience with sound policy." A few murmurs returned. Some nodded. Others watched, eyes darting between them like spectators at a tennis match. Kennedy didn't respond immediately. Instead, he gave a small shrug, eyes focused, not defensive, but engaged. Then, calmly, he reached into a folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper. "This," he said, holding it up, "is the Congressional Budget Office report from last quarter. I suggest everyone read page 14. It shows the national debt curve under your party's proposed plan." He laid it flat on the desk in front of him and looked back at AOC. "Now I might talk like a man who pumps gas for a living," he added with a half smile, "but I read this report. I studied it. And unlike some people in this room, I didn't need a think tank to explain it to me." The audience stirred again. A few chuckles, a few scowls. AOC tilted her head slightly, eyes narrowed. "Senator Kennedy, since we're sharing credentials and origins, let's not pretend economic crises started last year. Some of us have been fighting for structural equity, while others handed tax breaks to billionaires and called it relief. For the working class, now it was Kennedy's turn to lean back. And some of us," he said, "spent years warning that printing money and punishing small businesses would have consequences. Both were seasoned politicians. Both had learned the art of delivering facts wrapped in story and story wrapped in fact." But this was becoming more than a policy debate. The hearing was meant to address the Economic Oversight Committee's next steps. But the conversation had taken a turn into something much bigger, a reflection of two Americas. One built on legacy, the other built on grit. One read graphs, the other lived them. A CNN Chiron popped up on live screens. Kennedy fires back at AOC in electrifying exchange. Economic war of worlds. Meanwhile, Twitter was on fire. Hashtags like #Kennedy claps back and #AOCV's Kennedy were trending within minutes. Clips of Kennedy talking about his mother cleaning houses and AOC referencing billionaires were already cut, captioned, and shared across feeds. Inside the chamber, a senior Democrat whispered something to his colleague and passed a note down the line. On the Republican side, aides were quietly pulling data sheets and talking points. The hearing, just 30 minutes in, had become a media battlefield. But amidst the fire and policy warfare, something else was brewing. A thread that connected both speakers without them realizing. Behind their sharp exchanges were two very different kinds of truth. AOC represented a generation of leaders rising fast, armed with degrees and platforms, passionate and unrelenting. Kennedy represented the old but deeply rooted guard, fluent in systems battle-tested by class and tradition. What neither expected, what no one expected, was how closely their stories mirrored each other beneath the surface. The moderator, clearly tense now, cleared his throat. "We'd like to return to questions regarding the proposed Small Business Recovery Act." But no one was listening. Not really. Because what had started as a routine discussion was now a headline in real time. The room had recalibrated. The stakes had shifted. And both sides knew this wasn't the last exchange. Not by a long shot. By evening, the hearing clips had aired on every major network. Kennedy's soft-spoken rebuttal, AOC's sharp precision. The exchange of words that turned a regular hearing into political theater was everywhere. From cable news to group chats, people weren't just watching anymore. They were choosing sides. In a downtown D.C. newsroom, a young journalist named Aaron Chow reviewed the footage for the 6th time. Something about the conversation still tugged at her, not just the class tension or the showmanship, but a look Kennedy gave as he mentioned the budget report. It was subtle, controlled, but to calm. "Check what's on page 14, she muttered, flipping open a PDF of the Congressional Budget Office's quarterly breakdown. What she saw stopped her. Line 17. An unexplained $2.8 billion transfer request. Tagged as category, discretionary, unclassified. The request had been proposed 3 weeks ago. Quietly passed through a procedural vote. No debate. No press release. Nothing. Erin's fingers flew across the keyboard. She pulled up economic briefing memos, scanned archived Senate hearings. Then she found something else. Senator Kennedy had actually objected to that line item in a closed-door session. The recording was classified, but the minutes confirmed it. And the kicker. AOC had been one of the members who had supported its inclusion. Why would she back that? Erin whispered. And why did Kennedy bring it up in a hearing about small business loans? By midnight, she had a rough theory that the public argument between AOC and Kennedy wasn't just ideological. It was personal, and it wasn't over education or economic theory. It was about what neither of them had said out loud, what was buried in the fine print. Across town, inside a quiet Senate office, Kennedy sat with his chief of staff, Marcus Bell. She took the bait, Marcus said, handing him a report. The media's lit up. But Erin Chow is already sniffing around. She's sharp. Kennedy didn't answer right away. He stared at a framed photo of his parents on his desk, only thing he brought from Louisiana when he came to Washington. I didn't bring it up to humiliate her, he said finally, but we both know something isn't right with that transfer. And she knows I know. So what now? We wait. She'll move. I'll be ready. Meanwhile, AOC sat alone in her apartment, scrolling through reactions on her phone. The backlash was louder than expected. Her allies were split. Some called Kennedy's speech performative nostalgia. Others warned she had walked into a trap. She closed her phone and opened a secure email account. Inside was a draft memo from her senior policy advisor. Subject line, Red River disbursement, reassessment needed. She clicked it open and stared. The memo outlined the discretionary funds, yes, the same ones Kennedy had referenced. According to the draft, the money was tied to a high-priority infrastructure deal between federal agencies and an energy firm based out of Texas. The company had donated heavily to several political campaigns on both sides. It wasn't technically illegal, but it looked bad and worse. If anyone traced the vote logs, her name would be tied to the approval. AOC stood and paced the room. Her mind raced. She hadn't expected this. Kennedy, behind the charm and folksy drawl, had clearly known exactly what he was doing. She grabbed her coat and phone. Minutes later, she was in a car headed to Capitol Hill. The building was nearly empty, quiet except for the occasional night staff. But she wasn't there to speak to a crowd. She needed to speak to him. Alone. Kennedy was still in his office. When she arrived, he looked up as she entered, not surprised. He gestured to the chair across from him. "Didn't think I'd see you tonight," he said. AOC sat, her face unreadable. "You planned that speech," she said. He nodded. "I planned the truth. The rest came naturally." She hesitated. "Do you think I pushed the transfer for selfish reasons? I think you're smart. Smart enough to know when something smells off, and brave enough to walk back a mistake." She said nothing. Kennedy leaned in slightly. "We're in the middle of a chess game that neither of us started. But if we play blind, the people lose. And the wrong ones win." AOC stood slowly. "If you go public with the report, it burns everyone, not just me. Kennedy didn't blink. Maybe it's time someone lit a fire." She left without another word. But outside his door, she paused, her expression now tight with purpose. Whatever game had begun between them wasn't over, not even close. Because what had started as a public feud was about to become a national reckoning. By morning, the headlines had changed tone. What began as a viral exchange between AOC and Kennedy was now unraveling into something darker. The focus had shifted from education and class to something far more serious: an unexplained $2.8 billion transfer hidden deep in the government's discretionary spending files. The story broke first on a small independent media site, Capital Signals, with a headline that read, "Exclusive: Red River funds linked to energy lobby. Key committee votes under scrutiny by noon." It was trending on social media. Inside the White House press briefing room, the president's spokesperson dodged a dozen questions about the funds. At the Capitol, security was tightened. Reporters chased senators down marble hallways, waving documents and shouting questions about a company named Thermatex Energy. It's an obscure Southern firm that no one outside the energy sector had heard of until. Now, Senator Kennedy was silent. So was AOC. But both were moving quietly behind the scenes in her office. AOC had gathered her senior aides and legal counsel. The leaked memo from her policy advisor had been confirmed. Thermatex had received favorable treatment from several lawmakers, Democrat and Republican, through a side agreement attached to the Red River infrastructure project. The funds had been labeled as disaster resilience aid. But a large portion of the money had gone untracked. "What exactly is Thermatex?" AOC asked. Her chief of staff pulled up the dossier. Formed in 2009, based in Shreveport, Louisiana. Merged with an international holding company in 2016, registered in Luxembourg. Quiet donors to several PACs, including one that backed your climate bill last year. AOC's eyes narrowed. "So I voted for this thinking it was clean." "Technically it was," her staffer said carefully. "But it was buried inside a much larger vote." Only a few people noticed the wording, and Kennedy. He noticed. That's why he brought it up. But he never leaked it. Not directly. She sat in silence for a long moment. Then, calmly, she said, "Get me Thermatex's executive records. Board members, internal lobbying disclosures, everything." Crosstown, in a dimly lit Capitol subcommittee room, Kennedy stood with Marcus Bell, reviewing old transcripts. "Why now?" Marcus asked. "Why trigger all this with a single line in a budget report?" Kennedy didn't look up. "'Cause it's about to happen again." "What is?" "The second disbursement," Kennedy replied. "They're pushing through another $1.2 billion under resilience spending next month. If they succeed, Thermatex gets another payout just in time to fund the next election cycle." Marcus swore under his breath. "And you're saying AOC was just collateral?" Kennedy shook his head. "No, she was a target, a lightning rod. They figured if she defended it, people would be too distracted by her reputation to look deeper. She didn't know, and now she knows." Later that day, an encrypted message landed in Aaron Chow's inbox. No subject. No name, just a line. Red River wasn't the first. Look up Copper Trace 2014. Aaron's fingers flew across her keyboard. Copper Trace. It rang a bell. A defense spending controversy from a decade ago, millions redirected through a tech company later tied to a senator's cousin. The scheme was eerily similar. The trail was growing clearer and dirtier. By nightfall, AOC and Kennedy crossed paths again, this time behind closed doors in a classified briefing room inside the Capitol. She arrived first. He followed. Quiet nod between them. "No cameras this time," she said. "Not yet," Kennedy replied. "But we're running out of time." AOC pulled a document from her folder. Thermatex board member Men Dillon. He served as Deputy Secretary of Energy under the last administration. He also sat on the steering committee for the Red River funds. Kennedy placed another sheet on the table. "And here's a recording from a lobbyist last year, bragging that Thermatex had friends in both parties who know how to keep mouths shut." They looked at each other. The rivalry from the hearing felt distant, now like it belonged to different people. "You want to go public?" AOC asked. Kennedy hesitated. "They'll come after us. Hard." "They already are," she said. "But if we don't do this now, They'll bury the truth behind a wall of distractions. And next time, it won't just be hidden funds. It'll be power plants, pipelines, votes. Kennedy nodded slowly. "You speak," he said, "and I'll stand behind you." AOC gave a slight smile. "No," she said, "we speak together." The following morning, a press alert hit every major outlet. Breaking AOC. Senator Kennedy called joint hearing on Red River Fund's massive misuse allegations. Expected the game had changed, and this time they weren't playing for sound bites. They were playing for the truth. The Capitol was unusually quiet that morning, though the air was anything but calm. Outside, media vans formed a line 3 blocks long. Reporters had already staked out positions near every possible exit. Inside, behind layers of security and red tape, preparations for the joint hearing between Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Senator John Kennedy were underway. This wasn't normal. Democrat and Republican calling a joint oversight hearing, unscripted, unvetted by leadership. 2. The public, it looked like bipartisanship in action. 2 insiders, it was chaos. At exactly 9 a.m., AOC walked into the hearing chamber flanked by 2 aides. Her posture was straight, eyes focused, not on the cameras but on the rows of lawmakers seated before her. Kennedy followed minutes later, nodding once to her before taking his seat on the opposite side of the long wooden table. "This hearing," AOC began, "is not about partisanship. It's about accountability." She turned to the crowd. "Today we present documents, recordings, and correspondence that suggest the misuse of $2.8 billion in discretionary funds, funneled through a shell corporation with deep ties to elected officials." Whispers spread immediately through the chamber. Cameras zoomed in. On-screen graphics popped up. Red River scandal, breaking down the allegations. Then Kennedy spoke. The company in question, Ermitex, operated legally. "That's what makes this dangerous. They didn't steal. They were invited in. The rot isn't outside the system. It is the system." Okay. Gasps scattered through the room. A few lawmakers leaned back uncomfortably. Over the next hour, they presented evidence. Internal memos showing advanced knowledge of lobbying efforts. A voice recording of a Thermatex consultant joking about controlling the committee votes. During a charity fundraiser, campaign donation logs small, carefully split payments designed to avoid media scrutiny. Then came the moment that changed everything. AOC held up a printed email. This message, she said, was sent from the office of Congressman Will Stratton, chair of the Appropriations Subcommittee. It reads, "Secure the Red River line before press sniffs Itramine Thermatex. They have friends here. Use Kennedy as a decoy. Keep Cortez chasing numbers." The room erupted. Lawmakers began shouting. Stratton, seated 3 rows behind AOC, stood up, red-faced. "That email is taken out of context," he barked. "Would you like to explain the context?" She asked sharply. Stratton hesitated behind him. Aides exchanged frantic glances. One stood and left the room. Kennedy leaned forward into his mic. "Mr. Stratton, you called me a decoy. That implies you knew I'd raised concerns publicly. Did you coordinate this leak? Did you use both of us to shield the flow of money while redirecting blame?" Stratton's lips tightened, but he didn't answer. By noon, the hearing had become front-page news globally. International outlets picked it up. Financial analysts started combing through American infrastructure deals. The euro dipped. Foreign governments issued cautious statements. That afternoon, a security breach was reported inside the Energy Department's internal server. Someone had attempted to delete the Thermatex lobbying disclosures. IT flagged the incident before it could succeed. The user was traced back to a private firm operating out of Northern Virginian intelligence contractor. Meanwhile, Erin Chow published a follow-up report, Thermatex's Global Web, Secret Deals, Ghost Donors, and the lawmakers who looked away. She included interviews with 2 whistleblowers, both former staffers on the Energy Oversight Task Force, their voices distorted and identities hidden. They described a decade-long pattern of routing federal funds through strategically timed disaster legislation, always during moments of public distraction. By nightfall, panic had set in across multiple congressional offices. In a quiet Capitol hallway, Kennedy approached AOC. "They'll come after us now," he said. "Not just with words, with everything they have." She nodded. "Then we hit first." AOC handed him a folder. Inside were the names of 3 former Thermatex consultants now working for lobbying firms, connected to the Department of Defense. One of them was also a distant cousin of Congressman Stratton. "This isn't just about infrastructure anymore," she said. "It's national security." Kennedy read the names carefully. "We go public. We call for a special counsel," AOC replied. "Tonight." And that's exactly what they did in a late-night joint press conference. Under the glow of Capitol Dome lights, flanked by supporters and flustered reporters, they demanded an independent investigation into Thermatex, Red River. And the entire chain of political influence it had bought it was a moment neither of them had planned. AOC, the firebrand progressive; Kennedy, the Southern traditionalist. Once opponents, now bound by something larger than politics. They weren't allies, they were survivors in a political war neither of them started, and the real enemy hadn't shown their face yet. The Capitol woke to chaos. Cable news aired the joint press conference on a loop. Pundits were scrambling. The word special counsel had triggered a frenzy not seen since the days of Mueller. By mid-morning, 3 major news outlets had independently confirmed that Thermatex executives had been subpoenaed. But what hadn't made the news what couldn't was what was unfolding beneath the surface. An unmarked envelope arrived at AOC's D.C. office early that morning. It had no return address, no postage, just a plain manila folder slid under the door by someone who clearly knew where to go. Inside were photos, grainy, black and white surveillance stills. One of them showed AOC entering a hotel 2 weeks earlier with her senior policy advisor. Another showed Senator Kennedy stepping out of a black car on K Street late at night, flanked by 2 unidentified men. Taped to the last photo was a note written in block print. "You've both been watched. You're walking into something bigger. Don't trust anyone, especially not your own." AOC's breath caught. She didn't call staff. She didn't notify Capitol Police. She picked up her secure phone and called Kennedy. He answered on the first ring. "I got them too," he said. So they met again in private, again off the record. A nondescript conference room in the Library of Congress, chosen precisely because it was off-grid and rarely monitored. "They're trying to rattle us," AOC said, laying out the photographs. Kennedy nodded slowly. "Or warn us." She frowned. "You think this is coming from inside?" "I think someone knows. This trail leads further than either of us imagined. Thermatex is just the door. Behind it is a corridor of corporations, defense contracts, shell companies, and dark money. And we've only taken a few steps." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a flash drive. "Encrypted documents," he said. "Former DHS analysts sent them. Said the Red River funds were modeled after an earlier program operation, South Bolt." "I've never heard of that," she said. "Exactly," Kennedy replied. "Buried. Meant to fund civilian infrastructure as a front. But the money was siphoned to intelligence-affiliated private contractors." She leaned back, stunned. "So this isn't just corruption, it's covert." Kennedy looked grave. "It's institutional." Meanwhile, inside the Pentagon, a quiet meeting took place between 2 senior officials in a secure room with no windows. One of them tapped a folder against the table. "They're getting too close." "She's unpredictable," the other replied. Kennedy, less so, but dangerous in his own way. "What do we do?" First official paused, then simply said, "Delay the hearing by time. Leak something. If they won't stop on there, we'll make sure they're discredited before they go further." That same afternoon, a story dropped. Breaking. Unconfirmed allegations of ethics violation emerge against AOC aide. Anonymous source claims misuse of data access. It was baseless, thinly sourced, but effective. Cable hosts began asking questions. The right-wing media spun it into a frenzy. Social media exploded. Hashtag AOC scandal trended within an hour, despite no actual evidence. Kennedy called her, "They're starting the smear campaign." She didn't sound surprised. "I knew they would. They always go personal when they can't go legal." By the end of the day, congressional leadership had issued a statement urging restraint and careful review before assigning blame in any direction. In other words, they were backing away. AOC paced her office, angry but controlled. "They'll try the same with you," she told Kennedy in a secure call. "I'm ready," he said. But he wasn't. That night, Chief of Staff Marcus received a threatening message, a blurred photo of his family walking outside their home. No words, just the image. Marcus went pale. When he showed Kennedy, the senator stared at it for a long time before quietly saying, "They've moved into the open. This isn't politics anymore. This is war." AOC and Kennedy met again before dawn, this time with Erin Chow. She had connected the final dot. Traced Thermatex's Luxembourg parent company to a global firm named Valtrix Holdings, Erin said, eyes wide with disbelief. Valtrix has government contracts in 6 countries and ties to multiple lobbying firms in D.C. Their CEO once served on the board of Dinarca Defense. Kennedy looked at AOC. "I've heard that name." "So have I," she replied. Dinarca was blacklisted for price-fixing in Iraq reconstruction projects. "And now they're back," Erin whispered. "Through Valtrix, through Thermatex, through our Congress." Silence. Then Kennedy said, "It's not just about money anymore. It's about control." AOC nodded. "And we've just exposed their blueprint." The room went still. Because now they knew the enemy wasn't a person or a party. It was a machine built over decades, fueled by secrecy and protected by fear. And they had just lit a match. Rain hit Washington like a drumline the morning of the final hearing. Black SUVs crawled through misty streets. Barricades rose around Capitol Hill. Cameras and satellite. Trucks formed a steel and concrete crescent outside the Rayburn building. Something was different today. Everyone could feel it. Inside, the energy was electric but not celebratory. It felt like the wait before a crash. AOC walked into the chamber dressed in muted navy. No makeup, no flash. Behind her, folders. Flash drives, timelines. Beside her, Erin Chow, now acting as a public liaison for the whistleblowers and key evidence. Senator John Kennedy entered next. His suit looked tired. So did he. But his eyes were sharper than ever. Today wasn't a hearing. It was a strike. AOC was the first to speak. "Today we present not theory, but fact. Not partisanship, but proof. And not just corruption. A collusion across corporate and state lines engineered to bleed this country's budget under the cover of patriotism." Then she pressed a button. On screen appeared a web diagram titled The Valtrix Network. It wasn't just Thermatex. It wasn't just Red River. It was Copper, Trace, Southbolt, Atlas Grove. And Canopy 17 each, a coded federal project with familiar signs. Large emergency budgets. Minimal oversight, quiet campaign donations, strategic vote placements, and ties. To a single parent and to Valtrix Holdings. Kennedy stepped forward. "I stand here not as a Republican, but as a citizen," he said, "and I want to be clear. These programs were designed by both parties, funded by both parties, and shielded by leaders more interested in silence than service." He pulled out a printed email with redactions removed. "This document shows that members of the House Appropriations Committee knowingly reworded disaster funding language to include private contractors with known criminal ties, Murmurs erupted in the room. Stratton wasn't present. Neither. Were half the committee members under scrutiny? But everyone knew they were watching. Then came the bombshell. Aaron Chow stood. I have submitted testimony from 3 whistleblowers. One was present at a 2018 meeting in which an internal Voltrix consultant outlined a strategy to embed influence across energy, intelligence, and infrastructure portfolios through proxy firms. This includes hiring former staffers of members on this committee and planting talking points into subcommittee drafts. She paused. The strategy was called Operation Filigree. Gasps. For the first time, the room shook. One senator stood to object, but the chair overruled. You will remain seated. The witness has the floor. Screens displayed text messages, anonymous donor maps, and declassified correspondence. Dots were connected, names implied, implications obvious. The system had been breached from within. Long before this moment, then AOC revealed the final piece. We now know that Operation Filigree's ultimate goal was not just money. It was normalization, training the system to accept corruption as convenience, to shift lines of legality so slowly, so invisibly, that one day no one questions why a private firm holds veto power over a public contract. Kennedy added, and to those who say this is treasonous, look again. What's more treasonous than letting the taxpayer bankroll betrayal? No one clapped. No one cheered. This wasn't a moment for applause. This was the unveiling of an infection. Then came the silence, but not the safe kind. The heavy kind, the kind that falls before a storm. Cameras cut back to cable studios. Social media exploded with hashtags, hashtag filigree files, hashtag Red River Truth, hashtag Val TRIX leaks. AOC walked out without looking back. Kennedy followed, hands in his coat pockets, head low but proud. In the hours that followed, a special prosecutor was appointed. Several committee members were suspended. Thermatex's offices were raided by federal agents. Voltrix Holdings' U.S. assets were frozen. A formal investigation was opened into 3 cabinet departments. Aaron Chow received a secure offer from a major publication to run an investigative desk focused on state corporate fusion cases. She declined. She had more to do first. That evening, AOC stood on the Capitol steps. In front of dozens of microphones, she said, "This wasn't about one party or one scandal. This was about the soul of our democracy. And from today forward, no budget will go unquestioned. No name unchecked. No silence unchallenged." Kennedy didn't speak that night. But a video surfaced later, taken on someone's phone. He stood at a gas station in Louisiana, talking quietly with a man who looked like a mechanic. Kennedy handed him a folder. The man nodded. People called it a legend, but it wasn't. It was just the beginning. Because what AOC and Kennedy started wasn't a takedown. It was a warning shot. And somewhere in some quiet boardroom or shadowy office, those who had played the game for too long were realizing the game had changed.